Trust doesn't collapse because people suddenly become evil. It collapses because the structure supporting cooperation quietly shifts. And when the structure shifts, rational people begin behaving in ways that look like betrayal. Most people misunderstand trust. They think it's a personality trait, a moral virtue, something you either have or you don't. But trust is not primarily moral, it is strategic. It is an equilibrium inside a system. And once you see it that way, the world becomes far less confusing. Because when trust breaks, it's rarely random, it's predictable. Game theory gives us a clean lens for this. In a stable, repeated interaction, cooperation can be the most profitable move. If I know I will deal with you again tomorrow, and the next week, and next year, then my reputation matters. If I defect today, I may gain something short term, but I lose long-term value. So I cooperate, not because I'm noble, but because it pays. Now remove the future. If I believe this is the last interaction, if I believe consequences won't follow me, if I believe reputation will not carry forward, suddenly cooperation becomes fragile and defection becomes tempting. This is the core mechanism behind trust collapse. In the classic prisoner's dilemma, two individuals choose whether to cooperate or defect. If both cooperate, both win moderately. If one defects while the other cooperates, the defector wins big. If both defect, both lose. In a one-shot game, defection dominates. In a repeated game, cooperation can emerge, but only if the future is long enough and retaliation is credible. Trust lives inside repeated games. The moment someone believes the game is ending, the incentives invert. This is why companies that have operated ethically for decades suddenly cut corners when bankruptcy looms. The time horizon collapses, long-term reputation is no longer valuable, extracting short-term value becomes rational. It's why political alliances fracture close to elections. It's why employees hoard information during restructures. It's why business partners who seemed aligned for years suddenly diverge when an exit opportunity appears. It feels emotional. It feels personal. But structurally, it's often inevitable. You see this dynamic clearly in financial crises. Banks lend to each other daily based on trust. They assume the system is stable. But the moment there is doubt about solvency, institutions pull liquidity. They protect themselves. That protection accelerates instability. What began as suspicion becomes reality. Expectations reshape behavior. Behavior confirms expectations. Trust doesn't slowly decay. It cascades. This is reflexivity. Once enough actors believe others will defect, preemptive defection becomes rational. And once preemptive defection spreads, cooperation collapses almost instantly. There is another layer here that's even more uncomfortable. Sometimes trust collapses, not because someone changed, but because the two parties were playing different games from the beginning. One thought it was infinite, the other knew it was finite. In game theory, this distinction is critical. An infinite game encourages cooperation because the future is open-ended. A finite game, especially one with a known endpoint, tends toward defection as the end approaches. If I know this partnership ends in 12 months, my incentive in month 11 is very different from my incentive in month 2. This is common in business partnerships. One founder thinks long-term brand building, the other thinks acquisition within 3 years. While growth is steady, cooperation appears stable. But the moment an acquisition offer appears, incentives diverge. One wants to sell, the other wants to build. From the outside, it looks like betrayal. From a structural perspective, it was embedded from day one. Misaligned time horizons are silent trust killers. And here's where most people remain naive. They assess trustworthiness by character. They say, he's a good guy, or she would never do that. That analysis is shallow. The more important question is, what does the structure reward? What does the payoff matrix encourage? If someone can gain significantly by defecting without meaningful consequence, eventually someone will, even if that someone is otherwise good. Evolutionary biology reinforces this. There is a concept called an evolutionarily stable strategy. A strategy becomes stable when, once widely adopted, alternative strategies cannot easily invade. Cooperation can become stable in a population, but only if defectors are punished consistently. If punishment weakens, defectors gain an edge. Once defectors succeed, others imitate them. The population shifts, cooperation collapses, and the collapse feels sudden, but structurally it was brewing. You see this in workplace cultures. A company may pride itself on collaboration. For years, cooperation works because promotions reward team success. Then metrics shift, individual performance is emphasized, bonuses are tied to personal output. Suddenly information is withheld, people take credit, silos emerge, leadership calls it a cultural issue. It's not, it's incentive drift. Trust cannot survive misaligned incentives. It can only survive aligned ones. The same principle plays out in personal relationships. When both partners believe the relationship has a long future, cooperation feels safe. Sacrifice makes sense, forgiveness is rational, but if one partner begins doubting the future, even subtly, their behavior shifts. They invest less, they guard themselves, they reduce vulnerability. The other partner senses this shift and mirrors it. Now both are hedging, neither consciously decided to sabotage the relationship. The perceived future shortened. Trust is a bet placed on the continuity of tomorrow. When tomorrow feels unstable, people hedge today. There's also the role of transparency. Trust thrives when incentives are visible. When hidden incentives exist, instability follows. If I don't know your real payoff, I can't predict your move. Uncertainty alone can trigger defensive behavior, and defensive behavior can trigger reciprocal defensiveness. What began as opacity becomes mutual suspicion. This is why systems that emphasize transparency often maintain cooperation longer. Reputation mechanisms matter, public accountability matters, clear consequence structures matter. In repeated games, reputation is currency. If reputation cannot be tracked or enforced, cooperation weakens. Consider competitive environments. In a training room, like in jiu-jitsu, cooperation exists because everyone expects ongoing interaction. You don't injure your partners because you'll roll with them tomorrow. Your long-term reputation inside the gym matters, but in competition, the interaction compresses into a single match. The incentives sharpen, the future shrinks to minutes, risk tolerance increases, intensity rises. It's not that character changes, the game changes. And when the game changes, behavior changes. Understanding this shifts how you interpret the world. Instead of asking, why did they betray me? You begin asking, when did the structure change? When did the time horizon shorten? When did the consequences weaken? When did incentives drift? Because most trust collapses are not emotional explosions. They are structural misalignments reaching their logical conclusion. There is another dynamic worth understanding. Once trust weakens, rebuilding it is exponentially harder than maintaining it. In repeated games, a single defection can be forgiven if the future remains long and retaliation is proportionate. But if defection becomes habitual, or if apology lacks credible commitment, the equilibrium cannot restore itself. Why? Because expectations have shifted. If I now believe you are capable of defecting again, I must factor that into my strategy. Even if you promise reform, I calculate risk. Cooperation becomes conditional, guarded, less fluid. The energy changes. This is why rebuilding trust requires not just apology, but structural reform. Changed incentives, visible consequences, extended time horizons. Without those, words are irrelevant. And this is the strategic lesson. If you want durable trust in your business, your team, your audience, your relationship, you do not rely on emotional appeals. You design environments where cooperation remains rational even when emotions fluctuate. You extend time horizons deliberately. You align rewards with long-term behavior. You make reputation visible and durable. You ensure defection carries cost. You reduce hidden incentives. You clarify expectations. Because trust is not sustained by optimism. It is sustained by design. The harsh truth is that many collapses of trust were predictable months before they occurred. Incentives drifted quietly. Accountability weakened subtly. Futures shortened gradually. But because people focused on personality instead of structure, they missed the signal. Trust does not hold because people feel good. It holds because the system rewards staying aligned. When that reward disappears, cooperation unravels, sometimes explosively. If you train yourself to see incentives instead of intentions, you gain an advantage. You will anticipate fractures earlier. You will design stronger systems. You will choose partnerships more carefully. You will understand when to double down and when to withdraw before collapse. And perhaps most importantly, you will stop taking structural breakdowns personally. Because often it wasn't hatred, it wasn't malice, it was a game that quietly changed. And the people who recognize when the game changes before everyone else does are the ones who remain stable while others scramble. Trust doesn't collapse randomly, it collapses when the equilibrium breaks. Understand the equilibrium, and you understand the collapse.